My name is Evelyn Hart, and I turned 43 last month. I tell people I like quiet birthdays, but the truth is, no one really remembers them anymore. That's why the text from my brother on Thursday caught me off guard. Mom wants everyone for Sunday dinner. Be on time this time. No emoji, no warmth. Just an order wrapped in familiarity. I stared at it longer than I should have. The last family dinner had ended with my father slamming a door and me walking out, carrying a dish of lasagna, the heat still trapped under the foil. I swore I wouldn't do it again. But by Saturday night, there I was in my kitchen, brushing garlic butter over bread, layering pasta like it might hold us together. Some habits are stitched too deep to pull out cleanly. Charleston in early spring smells like salt and jasmine sweet enough to fool you into forgiving things you shouldn't. As I drove down Meeting Street, the lamps cast soft halos over the cobblestones. My reflection in the window looked calm, maybe even hopeful, though I didn't trust it. When I turned onto my mother's street, the old house glowed just as I remembered every window lit, every shadow carefully managed. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, listening to the hum of cicadas and my own pulse in my throat. Then I took the lasagna, still warm beneath its foil, and started toward the door that always opened like a test I kept failing. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in her pale blue cardigan, hair pinned tight as always, her smile rehearsed and brittle. "You made it," she said, as if it were a surprise. She didn't hug me, just stepped aside to let me in, her perfume mingling with the heavy scent of cinnamon candles. Inside, the house looked unchanged. The same framed vacation photos lined the hallway, all of us younger, laughing at things I can't remember. The dining room glowed under a chandelier that hummed faintly, the table already set for 4. My father sat at the head, scrolling through his phone, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up, gave a brief nod, and went back to reading the screen. That was his way of saying hello. Mark's voice carried from the kitchen, loud and confident. He was telling a story about some new deal he'd landed, something about a supplier, a warehouse, a big opportunity. When he saw me, he grinned, the kind that showed teeth, but not warmth. "Evie, you actually came. I said I would," I answered, setting the lasagna on the counter. The foil crinkled louder than I expected. He peeked at the dish, still bringing the classics. "Huh." My mother laughed lightly, too quickly. "Your brother's just teasing," she said, rearranging the silverware even though it was already perfect. I watched her for a moment. Everything she did seemed to tremble slightly, like she was trying to hold the evening together by sheer will. The house was spotless, every candle burning, every surface gleaming, and yet beneath it all was a tension so sharp I could feel it in my teeth. I smoothed my blouse and took my seat. The chair creaked softly. Outside, the cicadas grew louder, their rhythm pulsing against the strained quiet of the room. Dinner began the way it always did, with noise. Mark talked too loudly, my mother laughed too brightly, and my father pretended to listen while scrolling through his phone. The silverware chimed against plates, the smell of roasted chicken and wine filling the room. I sat across from my brother, smiling when I was supposed to, nodding at stories that didn't need to be told again. They talked about neighbors I hadn't met, business partners I didn't care to know, and some cousin's engagement that apparently required applause. I tried to follow the rhythm, to blend in with the practiced choreography of this family dinner, but every gesture felt foreign. My mother's bracelets clinked softly as she reached for the bread basket. "Evie, take some," she said, her tone gentle but distracted. I did. It was easier than refusing. Halfway through the meal, Mark brought up the family reunion. "So," he said, "we're thinking Hilton Head again. Maybe the second weekend in April." He looked around the table for agreement. My father nodded absently. My mother said, "That sounds lovely." No one looked at me. I waited a moment, then forced a small smile. "Just tell me when the reunion is," I said evenly. I'll book early this time." The words landed like glass on marble soft, but impossible to ignore. My mother's hand froze mid-air. My father cleared his throat and reached for the butter. Mark's grin flickered, then returned, sharper now. "You," he said, laughing under his breath. "You're not part of the family reunion. Evie, don't show up." The sound of his voice was casual, effortless. That made it worse. My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, eyes glinting with something that wasn't surprise. My father slapped the table once, laughing short, abrupt, like punctuation. The room seemed to contract, the air thinning around me. I could hear the chandelier humming overhead, the faint tick of the clock in the hall. My lasagna sat untouched at the edge of the counter, steam no longer rising from it. Mark leaned back, satisfied, pouring himself another glass of wine. "I'm kidding," he added, though no one asked him to. His laughter echoed in the stillness, sharp and metallic. I looked at my mother. She kept her eyes down, folding and unfolding her napkin. My father had returned to his phone, thumb scrolling steadily. No one spoke. In that silence, something in me cracked not loudly, not visibly, but cleanly, like a hairline fracture in glass that you only notice when the light hits it right. I took a slow breath, feeling my pulse steady even as my hands trembled under the table. I realized then that this was not a misunderstanding, not a slip of words. It was choreography, one they had practiced long before I arrived. I didn't stand up right away. The room was still full of laughter, thin, brittle, echoing off the walls, but it already felt distant, like a radio playing in another house. I placed my fork down, folded my napkin carefully, and looked at Mark. His grin lingered, waiting for me to play my part, to blush, to laugh, to pretend. "Did you mean it?" I asked quietly. His smirk faltered just long enough for the truth to show through. "You know I did," he said, voice steady, almost proud. I nodded once. My mother reached for her wine glass, fingers trembling just slightly. My father didn't look up. I pushed my chair back slowly, letting the legs scrape against the floor just enough to make them listen. "I think I'll head out," I said. The words came out calm, almost polite. No one stopped me. In the hallway, the air smelled like lemon polish and something faintly burnt. I took my coat from the hook by the door, pulling it on without hurry. My mother's voice followed me, soft, practiced, useless. "Evie, stay. It's just dinner." I turned to her, one hand on the doorknob. "No. Mom," I said. "It's a message. I got it. Outside." The humidity hit me like a wall. The night was heavy and still, the kind that made sound travel too easily. I crossed the porch steps and walked toward the car, lasagna dish in hand, the heat still trapped under the foil. Behind me, their laughter started again, muffled, distant, automatic. I unlocked the car, set the dish beside me, and started the engine. The dashboard light washed everything in pale blue. I didn't cry. I just drove. The first morning after the dinner, I woke before sunrise. The apartment was dim and colorless, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it just exists. I made coffee and watched the light crawl across the floor, thin and pale. My phone sat face down on the counter, still and dark. No messages, no missed calls. By afternoon, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, opened every window to let in the salt air from the harbor. The noise of the street below filled the space where their voices used to live. It almost sounded like peace. On the second day, I tried to work. Numbers usually steadied me, columns, invoices, balance sheets, but the words on the screen kept blurring. My mind wandered back to the dinner table, to the way my mother's eyes slid away from mine. I could still hear Mark's laugh, low and mean, replaying itself like a loop I couldn't stop. By the third day, the silence had changed shape. It wasn't cold anymore. It felt like distance, deliberate and earned. I cooked for myself that night, just enough for one plate, and sat by the window while rain streaked down the glass. I didn't picture them eating together. I didn't want to. On the fourth day, I turned my phone over, half expecting something. Nothing. No apology. No explanation. Not even a careless text. For years, I had mistaken attention for affection, noise for love. Now there was nothing, and it was almost a relief. That evening, I poured the last of the Merlot into a glass and stepped out onto the balcony. The air smelled faintly of jasmine again, like it had the night I drove home. I leaned on the railing and let the quiet settle, heavy but clean, until the world below went still enough to hear my own breathing. On the fourth night, I left my phone on the kitchen counter while I took a shower. When I came back, the screen was glowing in the dark. For a second, my chest tightened. I thought it might be my mother, or even my father, but it wasn't. The message was from Mark. "Hey, weird question, did your bank block the transfer? The loan payment didn't go through." I read it twice, then again, just to be sure I hadn't missed a line. There was no greeting, no apology, no mention of the dinner. Just business. I stared at the words until they blurred, then set the phone down beside the empty wine glass. The audacity of it made me laugh, not a real laugh, but something closer to disbelief. After 4 days of silence, that was what he chose to say. I typed slowly, my fingers steady. Me, not family, not funded. Then I hit send and blocked his number before I could change my mind. The apartment stayed quiet, but something in me shifted. The silence no longer felt like an absence. It felt like a boundary. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my online banking. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Then I saw the transfers. The small amounts that had become routine over the years. 200 here, 500 there. 1,000 when he said his business was falling apart. Always temporary. Always promised back. Scrolling through the statements, I realized how easily it had all blended into the background of my life. Every payment had felt like obligation disguised as love. Each one came with the same unspoken rule: help now, don't ask later. I clicked through old emails, finding messages from him that read like scripts. "You're the reliable one, Evie. You always come through." At the time, I had mistaken those words for affection. Now they looked like proof of something else, how thoroughly I had been trained to make myself useful. The clock on my wall read past midnight when I finally closed the laptop. The room felt different, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had shifted. I poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, and stood by the window watching the city sleep. For years, I'd believed family meant giving until it hurt and then giving more. But in that quiet moment, I understood what I'd really been part of: a system built on guilt and dependence, disguised as love. I turned off the light and stood there in the dark, the street lamps painting faint lines across the floor. The phone was still on the counter, silent and blocked, the message already fading from the screen. I didn't feel guilty. Not this time. I felt still. Sleep didn't come easily after that night. I kept thinking about the numbers, how neat they looked in the banking app, how ordinary theft can seem when it hides behind family. Around 2 in the morning, I turned on the lamp and pulled a stack of old files from the drawer. Years of bank statements, tax folders, the quiet record of a life lived responsibly. I spread them across the table, page after page, the paper cool under my fingers. At first, I told myself I only wanted to check 1 or 2 things to confirm what I already knew. But soon I was tracing every payment I'd ever sent, the dates and descriptions lining up like a confession I'd written in slow motion. $200 when Mark's car broke down, $500 when he said he needed to cover payroll, $800 when Mom called crying about his temporary setback. Each transfer followed by a promise, always vague, always kind. I had called it generosity. In truth, it was surrender. I found the earliest one almost 7 years ago. The note read, "For Mark. Just this once." I remembered that night clearly. I'd been newly promoted, still proud, still wanting to be seen. He'd called, panicked, said he'd pay me back by the end of the month. He never did. Instead, he learned I would always say yes. The lamplight glowed against the receipts, turning the highlighter ink a dull gold. I began marking them one by one, a small ritual of reckoning. Each streak of yellow felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away too easily. I whispered the totals under my breath, the numbers climbing higher than I wanted to admit. By the time I finished, the air in the room felt heavy, charged. $20,000. That was what silence had cost me. I sat back and looked at the stack, neat, damning, impossible to deny. For a long time, I just stared at it, hearing the rain start against the windows. It wasn't angry rain, not the kind that lashes. It was steady, patient, almost tender, like the city itself understood exhaustion. I thought about calling my mother, about telling her what I'd found, but I knew how that conversation would go. She'd say it was family business, that Mark meant well, that I was overreacting. She'd use the word forgive like a command, and I'd hear myself agreeing, even as something inside me turned colder. Instead, I reached for a pen and wrote a single line at the top of the pile. That's over now. The words weren't loud, but they filled the room. When the rain grew heavier, I left the papers where they were and stood by the window. The reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, but steadier too. For the first time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I turned off the lamp and let the room fall into shadow. The pages faintly glowing in the dark like tiny pieces of truth I'd finally stopped hiding from. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed and pale. I made coffee and sat at the table, the stack of papers still there from the night before. The sight of them didn't sting anymore. It felt final, like a door quietly closing. By afternoon, the air had grown heavy again, the kind that presses against your skin. I was halfway through an email for work when a sharp knock broke the quiet. It wasn't the polite kind 3 quick raps. Too familiar, too certain. I froze, the cursor blinking on the screen. Another knock followed, louder this time. "Evie, open up." My father's voice. Rough, impatient. Behind him, another Mark's, faster, restless. "Come on, we just need to talk." I didn't move. Through the peephole, I saw my father's shoulders squared, his posture carved in frustration. Mark paced behind him, phone in hand, his expression flickering between anger and panic. They knocked again, harder. My picture frames rattled on the wall. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug to keep them steady. The warmth felt like an anchor. "Evie," my father called again, "you can't just ignore us." But I could. And I did. The knocking went on for another minute, then stopped. I heard their muffled voices outside, a few low words I couldn't catch, the sound of footsteps on the stairs, the grind of the car engine, then silence. I stayed where I was, breathing slowly until the air settled. My reflection in the darkened window looked calm, almost unfamiliar. Outside, the street glistened from the earlier rain, every puddle catching pieces of light. When I finally moved, it was to rinse the coffee cup and set it carefully on the rack. The quiet that followed was different this time, thick, deliberate, owned. It didn't ask for explanation or apology. It simply stayed. 3 days later, a soft thud broke the morning quiet. When I opened the door, a plain white envelope lay on the mat. My name was written in my father's handwriting, neat, deliberate, the same way he used to sign report cards and birthday checks. I picked it up and felt the weight before I even opened it. Inside were $20 bills, crisp and stacked, $400 in total. No note. I left it on the counter for most of the day, the way you might leave something fragile you don't want to break. By evening, curiosity gave in. I held the envelope under the kitchen light, tracing the careful script of my name again and again. It didn't look like love. It looked like payment. The phone rang just after sunset. My father's voice came through, steady and rehearsed. "Evie, the loan payment failed. he said quickly. It's a mess. Late fees, suppliers. We just needed a few days' grace. It's not like we used you. Don't take it personally. I didn't speak right away. The sound of his breathing filled the silence between us. Finally, I said, "That's the problem. You never did." Then I ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for a while, staring at the envelope. The air smelled faintly of rain again. It had started to drizzle outside, soft and rhythmic against the windows. I thought of the years spent bending myself small enough to fit their version of family, of every wire transfer, every excuse, every silence I'd mistaken for peace. An hour later, the phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. A calm voice introduced himself as Thomas Reed from Greenlight Legal. "We're confirming your co-signature on a $10,000 business loan for Mr. Mark Hart," he said. My throat went dry. "Excuse me, it appears your signature's on the document," he continued. "We're verifying before processing." "I never signed anything," I said. A pause. Paper rustled on the other end. "Then you won't be held liable. We'll be in touch." When the call ended, I stood there motionless, phone still pressed to my ear. The apartment felt too small for the noise in my head. I walked to the table and opened the envelope again, fanning out the bills until they spread like evidence. The clock ticked faintly in the background. I gathered the cash, folded it once, and dropped it into the trash bin. The sound it made was soft, almost gentle. I wiped my hands on a towel and looked out the window, where the rain had turned heavier, the street shimmering beneath the amber light. It wasn't anger that filled me. Then it was clarity, the kind that sharpens everything, that leaves no space for confusion. I turned off the kitchen light and stood there in the dimness, watching the storm move across the city, knowing that the next call wouldn't catch me unprepared. A month passed before I heard from any of them again. By then, the city had slipped into the soft light of early summer. I spent my mornings walking along the Battery, watching the water shift from gray to gold. The air carried the smell of salt and gardenia, and for the first time in years, it didn't remind me of anyone. One evening, an email arrived from my mother. It was short, no greeting, no signature, just a link. I clicked it before I could think better of it. A photo loaded slowly the family reunion. The same long table, the same white tablecloth, the same faces. Only one thing was different. The chair in the center, the one that used to be mine, sat empty. I stared at it for a long time. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet understanding that some absences speak louder than apologies. The light outside had turned amber, spilling across the kitchen floor. I saved the photo, then deleted it. Later that night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, the city humming faintly below. The world felt smaller, but cleaner. I thought about the woman I had been at that dinner table, the one who still believed showing up was enough to earn a place. She was gone now, and in her absence, something steadier had taken root. When the wind picked up, I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders and watched the lights flicker on along the street. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't ache. It simply was.